Welcome back. Well, it's their final kick at Canadian politics this year, so we're asking our Monday strategists to share their views on the best and worst moves of 2015. Rick Anderson's with I2 Issues and Advertising. Eddie Goldenberg, former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Greg Weston is with Nanos Research. Welcome to you all. The smartest, the most brilliant, the undeniably the best strategic move of 2015 is, drum roll please, Eddie?
I'd say when Mr. Trudeau broke away from the balanced budget ideology and promised that infrastructure spending and said he would accept deficit spending.
I knew you were going to say that.
I think that changed the dynamic of the campaign.
Why? Why was it so positive then?
Well, because I think what it did is it differentiated himself from the others, and given the economy and given the needs of the country, I think it was something that people accepted as new and different and workable.
Rick, you agree with him?
You know, that's probably the one I would have picked as well. The other best move of the year that I would think about is also by Mr. Trudeau. And it's what he did during the campaign, which was emphasizing the team, and what he's done since the campaign, which is talk about cabinet government. You know, and people said at the time, cynically, he was doing that because, you know, he personally, there were questions that the Conservatives were raising about him, about his experience and so on. But I think it's turning out to be a more profound difference in approach to government, and one that Canadians are welcoming.
Wow, Greg.
Sort of along the same lines, and a more generic one. And I think because it really stood out for me, and that was just the entire campaign team, both the leader, both Trudeau and his campaign team. That's one of the most flawless campaigns that I've seen in many, many years from any party. And given that they started, you know, at the back of the pack, and I thought they didn't panic. They did some very brave things like the deficit financing. Didn't get shaken by it, didn't wither with the campaign ads. I just thought all around that will be probably a model for campaign strategy for quite some time.
Look at you guys, all singing from the same song sheet on this one. Well, let's
when
hope
you win an election, everything has gone right. When you lose an election, nothing went right.
Okay, the blunder of 2015, I guess it's going to go to one of the election losers, but let's find out. Rick?
Well, if it's a strategic blunder, I would say it was the attempted move, abandoned in mid-campaign by the NDP to cast itself as a centrist party, which left the door open for what we were talking about that Mr. Trudeau then did, which was to emphasize a more activist government where the bottom line wasn't necessarily the only piece of the equation. So the flip side of what Mr. Trudeau did, what Mr. Mulcair did, was, I think, a mistake strategically. Tactically, though, the day that the Conservative campaign announced the tip line. I can't even say the word.
Barbaric practices hotline.
I just think that's got to go down as one of the worst moves in Canadian politics mid-campaign. It's not a big strategic thing. It was a one-day, well, it wasn't a one-day wonder, but it was, you know, it was a really tactical kind of thing and a mistake.
All right, Greg, he has two there. Do you have another one, or do you want to just amplify one of those two?
Well, I've talked to a lot of Conservatives since the end of the election, and that particular moment when that came out completely demoralized their teams. They all said the same thing, that, you know, you go to the morning team meeting, you're fighting election on the ground, that comes out, said it just took the air out of the Conservative campaign altogether. I think the overall blunder of the campaign for both the NDP and the Conservatives was completely misreading Trudeau and his campaign. They totally underestimated. The NDP in particular ran a campaign that, well, a week into it, Trudeau's just going to fall off the map, and we have to be the alternative, position ourselves as a party ready to govern. Sorry, didn't work that way.
Eddie?
I agree with what both Rick and Greg have said, but I think if there was one other strategic blunder, it was Mr. Harper calling an 11-week campaign. He showed that he had contempt and underestimated his opposition, and a shorter campaign, I'm not sure if Mr. Trudeau would have done as well.
So would Harper have done as poorly if he'd gone, because, you know, we took,
who knows?
If you went 37 days and you did the polling, actually Harper was in, you know, still in a position to form a government.
Who knows? But I think that it was I think it was a mistake.
Let's talk about stories. The story of the year is going to be the federal election, and we're going to probably talk about that later in the week. So let's just take that one off the table. Was there a story this year that caught your attention and you said that means something, whether it got lots of coverage or not, Greg? What's a leadership move or something that said this is important other than the election?
Well, pre and post. Pre-election, the Alberta election, the complete disintegration of Jim Prentice and the PC juggernaut as it had been for 40 some odd years. Yeah. I think that is a political story for Canada for this year. If you take the election out of the year, it would have been the big political story of the year, and the NDP taking over in Alberta. Who would have thunk? As far as post-election, I think if the aim of the whole Trudeau campaign was to promise to change the mood, I think they've done an exceptional job since the election in making sure that people actually see there is a change in mood. And I think that started with the morning after the picture of the Prime Minister in the subway in Montreal shaking hands with people getting on the subway. And it went to the swearing-in ceremony with throngs of ordinary Canadians on the front lawns. I think in the imagery, in changing the mood and the tone, I think they've done a really good job.
Eddie?
I think the leadership issue is how Canadians have reacted to the refugee file. Mm-hmm. I think the imagery of the Prime Minister meeting the refugees, the imagery of the Governor General meeting the refugees, particularly given what's happening south of the border, and given the right-wing reaction in Europe, is a fundamental leadership issue of leadership, and I think it's something that will be remembered as a defining moment for the country for a long, long time to come.
And did you have a story beyond that, or was that your story as well?
I mean, I agree with what's been said about the election in Alberta.
Rick?
I would say, Don, the maturing of what I would call the maturing of the climate change issue. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that the contrast between, of course, the Trudeau government and the Harper government at the stylistic or at the tonal level. I mean, the Trudeau government has embraced it, is running with it, is putting in the front window as a major focus and major already accomplishment in Paris. The Harper government tended to keep it in the back room somewhere and not talk about it. They didn't embrace the issue, but substantively, the targets that were submitted by Canada to the United Nations conference in Paris were developed by and submitted by the Harper government and then subsequently embraced by the Trudeau government. They sometimes describe them as too ambitious and they sometimes describe them as too modest. So we'll see where that ends up. But what the point, what I see in it is you see, regardless of kind of the body language, you see even the Harper government and now the Trudeau government having moved that file forward in a more substantive way than it was in the past. And you see basically across the country at the provincial level, with really only the exception of Saskatchewan, an embracing of some form of policy initiatives or expanded policy with respect to the topic. So this is going to be big dollars for Canadians. The tax consequences, the tax implications are in the tens of billions of dollars. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, so it's GST kind of magnitude in terms of the tax burden, but so it's a big deal.
Yeah. I'll throw another quick topic because I've still got a couple of minutes left, and I want to stick with you on this, Rick. Whether the Conservatives, what's 2016 look like for them? What's got to be done to get them back in the game? Because they haven't not really out of the game. They still got 100 seats, but what do they have to do to re-energize?
Well, I know our opponents are sort of puzzled by it or don't really believe it, but Conservatives are ending the year substantially at peace with where things are at. They think that there were many good accomplishments of the last decade, trade agreements and mostly balanced budgets and lower taxes and, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end, there were a lot of Canadians who felt it was time for a change. And you didn't find Conservatives were completely unhappy with the outcome of the election. They felt like somehow it was predictable or understandable, and they absorbed it. The loss for the Conservatives was relatively modest in historic terms. When the Liberals lost in '84, it was a much more significant defeat. when the Conservatives lost, not to call you a Conservative, Greg.
No, he's not. Trust me.
I wondered what you were waving at.
I knew you were going to. When the Conservatives lost in 1993, it was a way more colossal defeat than this. So, and the party's very happy with the leadership of Rona Ambrose and the new team in the House of Commons, and the tone that's being set, and some of the recent baggage is being shed, and so on. So, the party's feeling pretty content about where it's at. Which is not to say, just repeating what's gone on the last 4 or 5 years is the formula. Nobody's arguing that, not the leader, not the caucus.
What do you think?
Look, any party that loses an election is in a rebuilding process, and I think they're in a rebuilding process.
That's true.
I mean, one of the things that we learned in this election, we've learned in other elections, is people can change their minds, so that you don't run the next election based on the previous one. So I think that they have a big rebuilding process. I think their real problem is that if you look at the results of the election, the Conservative Party was basically shut out of urban Canada, and that's something that they're going to have to face.
That's true. Greg, last word to you.
I don't think really anything substantive is going to happen until there's a leadership race for real for a while. And, Conservatives have to play the job of official opposition, which they have a long history of knowing how to play. And I think that after sort of about a year and a half in the game, we'll see some serious momentum build to a leadership, and then it starts to get serious. Okay. In the meantime, being the skunk at the honeymoon, if I can really mangle the metaphor, is probably not going to be all that popular, and so they've just got to accept that the Liberals are enjoying a bit of a ride right now, but they also are there for a reason, and to play official opposition. They're good at it. They've got lots of seats to do it.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good holidays. We'll talk to you on the other side.